Layla Williams took a deep breath as she stood in front of the towering glass building. The morning sun reflected off the pristine windows of the marketing firm's headquarters, casting long shadows on the bustling streets below. She adjusted her blazer and glanced at her reflection in the glass doors. Confident, professional, prepared. This was the moment she had worked so hard for, an opportunity at one of the most prestigious marketing firms in the country. She'd graduated top of her class in business school, had a portfolio brimming with successful campaigns, and had been recommended by several influential figures in the industry. Everything about this job felt like the next natural step in her career. But as she took in the exclusive atmosphere of the office building, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to face more than just a job interview. The receptionist smiled politely as Layla approached, but the subtle glance at her name on the appointment list, followed by the slightly raised eyebrow, was not lost on her. "You can take a seat. Someone will be with you shortly," the receptionist said, her tone neutral, almost dismissive. Layla sat down, her heart pounding with anticipation. She tried to shake off the small slights. Maybe it was just her nerves playing tricks on her, but deep down she knew that being a black woman walking into a corporate environment like this came with an extra set of challenges. She dealt with it before: microaggressions, subtle dismissals, condescending remarks, masked professionalism, but today, she hoped, would be different. After what felt like an eternity, a tall, middle-aged white man in a sharply tailored suit appeared. His thin lips curled into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Layla Williams," he called, barely looking at her as he turned on his heel and motioned for her to follow. This was Jonathan Clark, the company's VP of marketing. He was the man with the final say in her hiring decision, and Layla could already sense the air of arrogance radiating off him. They entered a sleek, modern conference room with glass walls. Around the table sat 3 other executives, all white, their expressions politely curious but cold. Layla placed her folder of achievements on the table and took her seat, her confidence wavering only slightly under their scrutinizing gazes. The interview began with the usual questions: her background, her experience, her vision for the future. Layla answered each one with clarity and precision, detailing her innovative ideas for digital marketing strategies and citing successful campaigns she had spearheaded in a previous role. As she spoke, she could see that some of the executives were impressed. They nodded at her ideas, scribbling notes and exchanging glances. But Jonathan Clark remained unmoved, his expression growing increasingly patronizing with each of her answers. Finally, when Layla finished outlining a comprehensive strategy for one of their struggling divisions, Jonathan leaned back in his chair and smirked. "That's all very ambitious," he said, drawing out the last word in a tone dripping with condescension. "But I wonder, Miss Williams, if you really understand the kind of clients we deal with here. This is not, how should I put it, one of your little side projects." Layla's stomach dropped. The insult was casual, almost offhand, but she knew exactly what he was implying. He wasn't just questioning her qualifications, he was questioning her place in this world, her right to even be there. A black woman with ambition and talent. Unthinkable. His words stung, but she kept her composure, refusing to let him see how much it had affected her. Before she could respond, Jonathan delivered the final blow, his smirk widening. "I'm not sure you'd be the right fit for this company. We have a certain standard to uphold." There it was. The thinly veiled racism, hiding behind the corporate language of fit and standards. Layla swallowed the lump in her throat and forced a smile, knowing deep down that this wasn't about her qualifications or talent. It was about something much uglier. Something she'd faced her whole life, but had hoped wouldn't follow her into these prestigious halls. The interview wrapped up quickly after that. The other executives thanked her for her time, offering weak smiles that barely concealed their agreement with Jonathan's assessment. As Layla stood to leave, Jonathan's parting words hung in the air like a poisonous fog. "Maybe try somewhere more suited to your background." Layla nodded politely, though every fiber of her being screamed in outrage. She walked out of the conference room with her head held high, though her heart felt like it had been torn in two. As she stepped back out onto the city streets, she knew one thing for sure: they would regret this. Layla stepped out of the towering office building, her heels clicking against the pavement as she tried to hold back the tide of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. The fresh morning air greeted her, but instead of feeling invigorated, she felt hollow. She had been rejected before. Everyone faces setbacks on their career path, but this one felt particularly heavy. It wasn't just about losing an opportunity, it was about the blatant disrespect, the dismissal of her talent, and the insidious racism veiled behind corporate buzzwords. As she walked down the busy street, her mind raced. She had prepared for that interview for weeks, crafting every detail of her presentation, rehearsing answers, and making sure her portfolio was flawless. Yet, none of that seemed to matter. The moment she walked into that room, she knew she wasn't just another candidate to them. She was a black woman daring to exist in a space they didn't think she belonged. Jonathan Clark's smug smile and condescending remarks replayed in her mind, each word cutting deeper than the last. "Maybe try somewhere more suited to your background." Layla gritted her teeth. Her background, as if her background wasn't one of excellence, hard work, and relentless determination. As if she didn't graduate top of her class, build campaigns that shattered records, and outwork her peers at every step of the way. Yet none of that mattered to them. They didn't see her as Layla Williams, marketing genius. They saw her as a black woman who dared to step into their pristine world. Her phone buzzed in her bag, snapping her out of her thoughts. She pulled it out to see a text from her best friend. "Jasmine, how did it go?" "I knocked them dead." Right, Layla stared at the message, her fingers hovering over the screen. For a moment, she considered telling Jasmine everything about Jonathan's smugness, the thinly veiled insults, and the overwhelming sense of injustice she felt. But she hesitated. Jasmine had been her biggest cheerleader, and Layla didn't want to burden her with the ugly reality of what had just happened. "It was fine," she typed back, her fingers moving mechanically. "I'll let you know if I hear anything." She shoved the phone back into her bag and took a deep breath. There was no use in wallowing in what had happened. She had faced rejection before, and she had always found a way to push through. This would be no different. But as she walked past the bustling city shops and cafes, she couldn't shake the feeling that this time, something had changed inside her. By the time she got home, her mind was already working on overdrive. Layla sat at her small desk, flipping open her laptop. She stared at the screen for a moment before pulling up a blank document. Her hands hovered over the keys. The familiar fire that had driven her to succeed before began to flicker back to life. If they didn't think she was a good fit for their company, she'd prove them wrong on a much larger scale. For hours, Layla researched, planned, and mapped out her next steps. She wasn't just going to bounce back from this. She was going to build something even bigger, something that couldn't be ignored or dismissed. They would see her name again, but this time it wouldn't be as a candidate asking for a chance. It would be as a competitor, someone who they couldn't brush aside so easily. Weeks turned into months, and Layla threw herself into her work. Using her savings, she launched a small digital marketing consultancy out of her apartment. At first, it was just her, a laptop, and a handful of clients she had gathered through her connections. The work was grueling: long days, sleepless nights, constant stress, but it was also exhilarating. Layla had always been a hard worker, but now there was something more driving her, a need to prove to herself and to the world that she belonged to himself. At the top, her consultancy, Elevation Marketing, quickly gained traction. Layla's innovative strategies and fresh approach to digital campaigns stood out in an industry that often relied on tired, outdated methods. She built a reputation for delivering results, and soon, clients began seeking her out, impressed by her ability to connect brands with diverse audiences in ways that felt authentic. In just 2 years, Elevation Marketing grew from a one-woman operation to a thriving firm with a small team of talented marketers, each of them drawn to Layla's vision. Together, they took on larger and larger clients, developing groundbreaking campaigns that disrupted the industry. And as her firm's reputation soared, so did her personal profile. Articles in business magazines, speaking engagements at marketing conferences, Layla Williams was becoming a name people couldn't ignore. But no matter how much success she achieved, Jonathan Clark's words still lingered in the back of her mind. The rejection, the racism, the casual dismissal, they all fueled her to keep pushing, to reach heights no one thought she could. And the more she succeeded, the more determined she became. Then, one day, the call came. It was from an investment firm, one of the largest in the city. They were impressed by Elevation Marketing's success and wanted to discuss a potential partnership. Layla's heart raced as she listened to the proposal. The firm was looking to acquire struggling companies and bring in fresh leadership to turn them around. One of the companies on their radar, the very marketing firm that had rejected her 2 years ago. Layla couldn't believe it. The same company that had dismissed her was now floundering, and she had the chance to step in. The irony was delicious, but more than that, it was an opportunity she couldn't pass up. She agreed to meet with the investors, her mind already racing with possibilities. As she hung up the phone, Layla smiled to herself. Life had a funny way of coming full circle. They had rejected her, but now they were the ones who needed her. And this time, she wasn't walking in as a candidate. She was walking in as the CEO. 2 years had passed since that fateful day when Layla had walked out of the office building, defeated but determined. Now, she sat in her sunlit office, looking out over the bustling streets below. It was hard to believe how much her life had changed in such a short amount of time. Elevation Marketing was no longer a small, scrappy startup. It was a rising star in the industry. Layla's phone buzzed constantly with emails and calls from clients seeking her firm's expertise. It was a far cry from where she had started, working late nights at her kitchen table, barely scraping by. Today, she was preparing for one of the biggest meetings of her career. The investment firm that had reached out to her was interested in a formal partnership, and if everything went well, Layla would soon have the opportunity to take over the very company that had rejected her. As she gathered her materials for the meeting, her mind flashed back to Jonathan Clark. She could still see the smug look on his face, still hear the dismissive tone in his voice when he had rejected her. It had fueled her every step of the way, pushing her to build something greater than they ever thought possible. And now, here she was, on the verge of a takeover that would shake the very foundation of the company he had so arrogantly represented. Layla was snapped out of her thoughts by a knock on her office door. It was Malik, one of her top employees and a rising star in the marketing world. He had joined her team a year ago, drawn to her vision of building an inclusive, innovative firm that challenged the status quo. "You ready for this?" Malik asked, handing her a stack of finalized reports. Layla smiled, taking the reports and glancing over them. "I've been ready for this my whole life." Malik grinned. "That's what I like to hear. They won't know what hit them." Layla had built her team around the idea that different perspectives made for better results. Malik, along with the rest of her team, came from diverse backgrounds, each bringing unique experiences to the table. It was the very thing that had made elevation marketing so successful. While other firms were stuck in their old ways, Layla's company thrived on innovation, collaboration, and the power of diversity. As she made her way to the meeting with the investment firm, Layla couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come. The road hadn't been easy. She had faced countless challenges, from financial struggles to the constant, unspoken biases that followed her as a black woman in the business world. But with each obstacle, she had only grown stronger, more determined to prove that she belonged at the top. The conference room at the investment firm was sleek and modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city skyline. As Layla entered, she was greeted by a group of sharp-suited investors, their expressions neutral but curious. They had heard about her success, and now they were eager to see if she could be the one to turn around their latest acquisition, a struggling marketing firm that had once been a powerhouse but had lost its way under poor leadership. The irony wasn't lost on Layla. The firm in question was the very one that had rejected her, the one that had seen her as not the right fit, and now they were the ones in need of saving. It was poetic, really. The lead investor, a man named Richard Summers, stood up to shake her hand. "Ms. Williams, it's a pleasure to finally meet you in person. We've been following your work for some time, and I have to say, your firm's growth is impressive." Layla smiled, her grip firm as she met his gaze. "Thank you, Mr. Summers. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss how elevation marketing can help with your acquisition." They sat down, and the meeting began in earnest. Layla presented her vision for revitalizing the struggling firm, outlining a strategy that focused on innovation, diversity, and digital transformation areas where the old firm had fallen short. As she spoke, the investors listened intently, nodding in agreement as she laid out her plans. When she finished, there was a moment of silence as the investors exchanged glances. Then, Richard leaned forward, a smile playing on his lips. "I think we've heard enough," he said. "Ms. Williams, we believe you're exactly what this company needs. We're ready to move forward with the acquisition, and we'd like you to take over as CEO." Layla's heart raced, but her expression remained calm and composed. This was it. The moment she had been working toward for years, but even as she shook hands with the investors and finalized the details of the detail, her thoughts drifted to what came next. Taking over the company would mean more than just a new title and office. It would mean confronting the very people who had underestimated her, who had dismissed her potential. And at the top of that list was Jonathan Clark. As Layla left the meeting, her mind buzzed with plans. The takeover was just the beginning. Soon she would be walking back into that office building not as a rejected candidate, but as the new CEO. And when she did, Jonathan Clark would be the first to feel the shift in power. The elevator doors slid open, revealing the familiar sleek, modern lobby of the marketing firm that had once rejected Layla. She took a deep breath, the scent of polished wood and fresh flowers mingling in the air. The last time she had been here, she had walked out feeling humiliated. But today was different. Today, she wasn't here as a candidate. Today, she was the new CEO. The news of the acquisition had spread through the firm quickly. Employees whispered in hallways, their curiosity piqued by the idea of new leadership. Jonathan Clark, the VP of marketing, had heard the rumors too, though he couldn't quite believe it. As he sat in his office, his mind buzzed with disbelief. The firm had been struggling for months, and he knew his grip on power was slipping. But this, Layla Williams, the same woman he had dismissed so easily? Layla stepped into the office, her heels clicking on the polished marble floors, just as they had that day years ago. But this time, the receptionist greeted her with a wide, nervous smile. "Ms. Williams, welcome," she said, standing a little straighter. "The board is waiting for you in the conference room." Layla nodded politely, but inside, a quiet confidence radiated through her. She walked through the hallways, noticing the curious stares of employees as they peeked out of their cubicles. Some of the faces were new, but a few were familiar people who had been here during her humiliating rejection. Today, their expressions were different. Today, they looked at her with respect, even admiration. As she entered the conference room, the board members stood, offering handshakes and nervous smiles. They were still processing the news of the takeover, unsure of what kind of leader Layla would be, but she had no intention of making them wait long to find out. "Good afternoon, everyone," Layla began, her voice calm but commanding. "I know the last few months have been challenging for the company, but today marks the beginning of a new chapter." The room was silent as she laid out her vision for the company's future, focusing on innovation, inclusivity, and a new direction for marketing that embraced change rather than resisted it. She was clear, concise, and unapologetically confident. The board members, some of whom had likely been in the room during her initial rejection, now nodded in agreement, impressed by her poise and determination. But as the meeting wrapped up and the board members filed out, Layla knew there was still one person left to confront. Jonathan Clark had been conspicuously absent from the meeting, but Layla knew exactly where to find him. She made her way down the hallway toward his office, her heart pounding with anticipation. This was the moment she had been waiting for, not just the professional triumph, but the personal closure. She was no longer the woman who had been dismissed and disrespected. She was the CEO, and Jonathan Clark was about to learn just how much the power dynamics had shifted. When she reached his office, she knocked once before pushing the door open. Jonathan was sitting at his desk, staring out the window with a scowl on his face. He didn't bother to stand when Layla entered, but his eyes flicked toward her with a mix of resentment and disbelief. "Miss Williams," he said, his tone cold, "to what do I owe the pleasure?" Layla stepped inside, closing the door behind her. She stood tall, meeting his gaze head-on. "I wanted to personally inform you of some changes that will be taking place," she said, her voice steady. "Effective immediately, I will be stepping into the role of CEO. That means things around here are going to be different." Jonathan leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms over his chest. "Different, huh?" he said, his smirk returning. "And what exactly do you think you're going to change?" Layla didn't flinch. She had expected this arrogance from him. "For starters," she said, "we'll be focusing on diversity and inclusion. The old way of doing things clearly hasn't worked, and it's time for a fresh perspective." Jonathan's smirk faded. He could see that Layla wasn't playing games. "Diversity and inclusion," he muttered, his tone dripping with disdain. "I see. So this is personal for you, isn't it?" Layla didn't hesitate. "It's not just personal. It's business. This company is failing because it's stuck in the past. It's time to move forward, and that starts with leadership." Jonathan shifted in his seat, the weight of her words sinking in. He was losing control, and he knew it. But his pride wouldn't let him back down so easily. "You think you can just walk in here and take over? You have no idea how things work around here." Layla took a step closer, her voice calm but firm. "Actually, Jonathan, I know exactly how things work around here, and that's why I'm here to fix it." For a moment, the room was thick with tension. Jonathan's eyes flickered with anger, but he didn't respond. He couldn't. Layla had the power now, and there was nothing he could say to change that. "I'll give you time to pack your things," Layla said, her voice steady. "The board has already approved your resignation." Jonathan's face went pale, the reality of the situation hitting him hard. He opened his mouth to argue, but no words came out. Instead, he stared at Layla, speechless, as she turned and walked out of his office. As Layla left the building that day, the air felt different, lighter. The shadows of the past had lifted, and she knew this was only the beginning. She had come full circle, but now she was in control. Jonathan Clark had dismissed her, underestimated her, and insulted her, but today he had been the one shown the door. Layla smiled to herself as she stepped into the elevator, knowing that her journey was far from over. There was still much work to be done, but she was ready, and this time she was leading the way. Layla stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her new corner office, the city skyline stretching out before her. The afternoon sun bathed the buildings in a warm, golden light, casting long shadows over the bustling streets below. It was the view she had dreamed about for years, an office at the top, the seat of power she had worked so hard to earn. But as she gazed out at the city, her mind was already focused on the future. There was no time to dwell on past victories. The real work was just beginning. Her takeover of the company had sent shockwaves through the industry. The firm, once a leader in the marketing world, had been on the brink of collapse under Jonathan's outdated leadership. Layla's appointment as CEO was seen by many as a bold and necessary move, a signal that the company was finally ready to embrace change. But for Layla, this wasn't just about turning the company around. It was about building something bigger, something that truly reflected her vision of an inclusive, innovative, and forward-thinking business. As she sat down at her desk, Layla reflected on the whirlwind of the past few months. Since stepping into her new role, she had wasted no time implementing the changes the company so desperately needed. She had brought in fresh talent, young, diverse professionals who had previously been overlooked or underestimated. Together, they worked tirelessly to restructure the company's marketing strategies, embracing digital transformation and targeting a broader, more diverse audience. The results were already starting to show. The company had regained its footing, with new clients pouring in and old ones returning. Impressed by the fresh approach Layla and her team had brought to the table, the once stale office atmosphere had shifted dramatically. There was an energy now, a sense of excitement and possibility that had been missing for years. Layla smiled to herself, knowing she had done more than just save the company, she had transformed it. But as proud as she was of what she had accomplished, she knew there was still more to do. This company wasn't just a business, it was a platform. And Layla was determined to use that platform to lift others up, just as she had lifted herself. A knock on her door pulled her from her thoughts. It was Malik, holding a tablet and looking as excited as ever. "Layla, you have to see this," he said, crossing the room quickly. He handed her the tablet, his eyes gleaming with pride. On the screen was the latest analytics report from one of their newest campaigns at Campaign that had been Layla's brainchild, designed to showcase the power of diversity in branding. The numbers were staggering. Engagement had skyrocketed, clients were raving, and the company's reputation was soaring. Layla scrolled through the data, unable to hide her smile. "This is incredible," she said, looking up at Malik. "We're just getting started." Malik grinned. "Exactly. People are finally seeing what we're capable of." Layla leaned back in her chair, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. This was what she had always envisioned, a company that didn't just talk about change but actually embraced it. A company that didn't just pay lip service to diversity, but made it a core part of its identity. As Malik left her office, Layla allowed herself a moment to reflect. The journey to this point had been long and difficult. She had faced rejection, prejudice, and countless obstacles. But through it all, she had never lost sight of her goal. And now, standing at the helm of a company she had transformed, Layla knew she had not just achieved success, she had redefined it. Her phone buzzed on her desk, snapping her out of her thoughts. She glanced at the screen and saw a familiar name. It was Jasmine, her best friend and biggest supporter, calling to congratulate her on the latest campaign success. Layla answered with a smile, ready to share the good news. "Jasmine, you won't believe the numbers we just pulled in," Layla said, her excitement spilling into her voice. "I saw. You're everywhere." "Everyone's talking about elevation marketing," Jasmine replied, her voice full of pride. "I knew you'd make it, Layla. I always knew." Layla laughed, shaking her head. "I couldn't have done it without you, Jas. You've been there every step of the way." "Yeah, but you're the one who put in the work. This is all you." They chatted for a while longer, reminiscing about the early days when Layla had started her company from her tiny apartment, juggling clients and barely making ends meet. It seemed like a lifetime ago, but in reality, it had been just a few short years. Layla knew that her story wasn't just about personal triumph, it was about perseverance, resilience, and the power of community. She hadn't made it here alone. As she hung up the phone, Layla's thoughts turned to the future. Now that the company was back on track, she wanted to give back. She had already started mentoring young women of color who were trying to break into the business world, offering them advice, internships, and the kind of support she had wished she had when she was starting out. But Layla wanted to do more. She had plans to launch a scholarship program aimed specifically at underrepresented communities to help open doors for the next generation of leaders. It was her way of paying it forward, of ensuring that the path she had forged would be a little easier for those who followed. Layla's thoughts were interrupted by another knock at the door. This time, it was an older man from the board of directors, one who had been skeptical of her appointment at first, but had since come around to her leadership. "Miss Williams, I just wanted to say congratulations on the latest campaign. I wasn't sure what to expect when you first came on board, but I have to admit, you've done more than I ever thought possible. The company is in better shape than it's been in years, thanks to you." Layla smiled warmly, accepting the compliment. "Thank you, but it's not just me. It's the team. We're all in this together." The man nodded, impressed by her humility. "Still, we're lucky to have you." As he left, Layla turned back to the window, the city bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun. She had come so far, and yet there was still so much more to do. But this time, she wasn't driven by a need to prove herself. She was driven by a desire to make real, lasting change not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been underestimated, dismissed, or overlooked. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, Layla knew that the best was yet to come. The night of the gala had arrived, and Layla stood backstage, adjusting her gown and taking a few calming breaths. Tonight was special. She was about to receive the Businesswoman of the Year award, a prestigious honor that not only recognized her professional achievements but also symbolized everything she had fought for. The journey here had been long, and the obstacles she had faced were many. But now, she stood on the cusp of something bigger than just personal success. Tonight, she was being celebrated not just for what she had accomplished, but for what she represented. The ballroom was filled with the city's most influential business leaders, investors, and entrepreneurs. As Layla peeked out from behind the curtain, she could see familiar faces from across the industry, people who had doubted her, underestimated her, and in some cases, actively tried to block her progress. But tonight, they were all here to honor her, a black woman who had defied the odds, built an empire from scratch, and returned stronger than ever. Her phone buzzed in her clutch, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a text from Jasmine. "I'm so proud of you. You've earned every bit of this. Shine tonight, Layla. You deserve it." Layla smiled, the words filling her with warmth. Jasmine had been there for every victory and every setback. Tonight, it felt like a victory for both of them. "Miss Williams, you're up," a stage manager said, gently tapping her on the shoulder. Layla nodded, straightened her posture, and walked out onto the stage to the sound of thunderous applause. The spotlight shone brightly on her as she approached the podium, her heart racing but her spirit steady. As she stood there, looking out over the crowd, she knew this moment wasn't just about her. It was about everyone who had ever been told they weren't good enough, who had been rejected or cast aside simply because they didn't fit someone else's narrow definition of success. The applause died down, and Layla took a deep breath before speaking into the microphone. "When I started my career, I never imagined I'd be standing here today," she began, her voice clear and confident. "I faced my fair share of challenges, rejections, dismissals, and yes, even blatant racism. But every time I was told I wasn't the right fit or that I didn't belong, I reminded myself of the words my mother used to tell me. Don't let anyone else define your worth. You set your own value. The audience was silent, hanging on to her every word. Layla glanced around the room, spotting a few familiar faces, some of them board members from the firm she had taken over. Others, like Jonathan Clark, who had once tried to keep her from getting to where she was now. But tonight, none of that mattered. She had proven them all wrong, and not just by succeeding, but by building something bigger than they had ever imagined. I stand here today, not just as the CEO of Elevation Marketing, but as someone who believes in the power of change real. Meaningful change at real, continued. Inclusion and diversity are not just buzzwords. They are the foundation of innovation. They're what make businesses thrive. And when we make room for everyone at the table, we all win. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. She wasn't just speaking to the business leaders in the room. She was speaking to the next generation of entrepreneurs, the young women and men watching from afar who needed to know that they too had a place in this world, no matter how many doors were closed in their faces. I didn't get here alone, Layla said, her tone softening. I had support, guidance, and a community that believed in me even when others didn't. And that's why I'm committed to paying it forward. Tonight, I'm proud to announce the launch of the Rise Together initiative, a scholarship and mentorship program dedicated to supporting young women of color who are breaking into the business world. Because I believe that the future of business isn't just about profit, it's about people. And when we invest in each other, we create a future where success is shared. The room erupted in applause, louder than before, as Layla stepped back from the podium, her heart swelling with pride. She had done it. Not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been told they couldn't. This was more than just an award, it was a turning point. As Layla made her way off the stage, she was met by a flood of well-wishers, each congratulating her on her success and her speech. Among them was Richard Summers, the lead investor who had supported her through the acquisition. You were incredible up there, Richard said, shaking her hand firmly. This company, this industry, they're lucky to have you. Thank you, Richard, Layla replied, her smile genuine. But this is just the beginning. We've still got a lot of work to do. He nodded, understanding the weight of her words. I have no doubt you'll keep leading the charge. As the evening wore on, Layla found herself standing at the edge of the ballroom, watching the crowd mingle and chat. It was a surreal moment, seeing how far she had come, and yet she felt a calm resolve settling over her. The path ahead was clear now, and she was ready for it. Just as she was about to leave, a familiar figure approached. It was Jonathan Clark, the man who had once belittled her and dismissed her as not the right fit. He looked different tonight, less arrogant, more subdued. Layla, he began, his voice quiet. I just wanted to say, congratulations. You've done an amazing job with the company, far better than I ever could have. For a moment, Layla considered all the things she could say to him, all the anger, the hurt, the frustration she had carried for years. But as she looked at him now, standing in front of her, humbled, she realized that she no longer needed validation from him or anyone else. Thank you, Jonathan, Layla said, her tone polite but distant. I appreciate that. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving the past where it belonged. As Layla stepped outside into the cool night air, she felt lighter than she had in years. She had reached the top, but it wasn't the end, it was only the beginning. The world was changing, and she was ready to lead the charge. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from a young woman Layla had recently started mentoring. Thank you for everything you're doing. You're inspiring all of us. Layla smiled. This was why she did it. Not for the awards, not for the recognition, but to make sure that the next generation of leaders would have every opportunity she had fought so hard for. As she walked down the quiet street, the city lights twinkling above her, Layla knew one thing for sure. The best was yet to come.